Welcome back to the campfire at the mansion. Today we're going to be looking at this marshmallow, and you can see the marshmallow gets picked up when we stick it in the bowl. We can touch the marshmallow, nothing's happening. If we come over to the fire, right up here, it's going to cook really slowly. It's hard to tell, but if we go down deeper, it's going to cook really fast. We'll wait a few seconds for that. And once our marshmallow's cooked to the desired tenderness, you can see I can touch this, no big deal. And then if I... It's gone. Look at that. We ate the marshmallow. So you might be wondering, how did we create these amazing marshmallow campfire sticks? Well, I am so excited to show you today. First, let's talk about all the different attributes and things that are happening here. Number one, we have a stick. This stick has an invisible marshmallow object. It also has a trigger on it. This is what we use for eating. On our bowl, we have a trigger, which allows us to know when to attach the marshmallow to the stick. And on our campfire, you'll see we have two different triggers. One says we will cook slowly in this area, and this one says we are going to cook real fast right here. So you start in the slow zone, and if you put it deep into the fire, it starts cooking really fast. Diving right into variables, we have that bowl trigger that we just pointed out. The mallow on a stick is the invisible marshmallow object. The original position is a variable that we'll be using in motion. That's a vector variable. You'll also see that we have original rotation, which is a rotation variable. We have the fire trigger as well as the burn trigger, meaning it's going to burn if you go in that deep. So fire is the outer one and burn trigger is the inner one. These are both object variables that we're tying into. The iterate by is how fast do we iterate by. So this is how fast does the marshmallow grow. The marshmallow scale is what is the original scale of the marshmallow. Running determines when is the marshmallow growing. Iterator is a number that we use in motion. R, G, and B are the color values, so that way we can slowly change the color of the marshmallow into a deep golden brown and eventually a black. Face trigger is our latest trigger, which allows you to eat the marshmallow. When the world is started, we connect the trigger enter from the bowl trigger to our local event get mallow. We also connect the trigger enter for the burn trigger to local event burn start, and the trigger exit from the burn trigger to local event burn end. On our face trigger, we use the trigger enter event on that face trigger for face eat event. And then last, we listen to events on the fire trigger so we know when it's nearby the fire. These are going to come through as trigger enter and trigger exit events. At the beginning of the world, we set the vector mallow scale to be the scale of mallow on a stick. So this way we know how big is the marshmallow. Then we set the original position to be the position of self. This is running on the entire mallow stick, so we get the position of the stick and we save it, as well as the origin rotation. This way, when the player lets go of the stick, it returns right back to this position. At the beginning of the world, we also hide the mallow, and we color it 111, meaning it's bright white on the mallow stick. We set iterator to be 0 and set iterate by to be 1. These are kind of redundant because they're already set in our variables, but it's a good safety measure. And then we scaled the mallow on a stick to be mallow scale, also pretty redundant. Now when event get mallow with object is received, so remember we need to use the plus symbol to tie in an object. That's when the stick enters the bowl. You could even use the end of the stick, which is just hysterical. But when that happens, if the object that's entering this trigger is self, then we show mallow on a stick, because every time a stick enters that trigger, we get an event, so we need to confirm that it's the same object as self. Now when the face eat routine comes through, if the distance from the position of the face trigger to the head of the player is less than or equal to 0.15 meters, we then will cancel sending the loop event. This is the grow event. We set iterate by back to 1, we hide the mallow on a stick, we color it back to white, and we set running to be false. We then scale with mallow scale on the mallow stick. So this returns it back to its original scale, its original color, sets everything back to 0, including our iterator back to 0. And now the mallow is no longer visible, so it'll look like you just ate the marshmallow. Similarly, when a player lets go of the stick, we want it to return back to its original position. So the first thing we do is cancel sending event loop. We move to the origin position on self. We rotate with origin rotation on self. And then we do the exact same eat routine where we return it back to its original state on the marshmallow. When burn starts with object, so when you stick the stick farther into the fire, what's going to happen is the object, if it's self, is going to iterate by 5. And this is going to make it so it increases in color faster. Similarly, when burn ends, when you move it out of the fire, we set iterate by to be 1. This makes it so it goes back to being at a slow speed. And again, just note that we're using an if statement to check if the object equals self, so we know that it is self that's entered and exited that trigger. Now you'll also remember that our trigger enter and trigger exit events are from the large trigger going around the entire fire. So when the trigger enters that, we want to know that it is self that's entered. We then set running to be true, and we send event loop to self with a 1 second delay. Now we're using a Boolean called running, and what this allows us to do is make sure that when we set it to be false, that the cancel sending loop actually cancels. Every so often it just doesn't cancel, and so this just prevents any possible error by using a Boolean to confirm that it's turned off, and I'll show you how that works in just a second. So as you'll see, when trigger exit with object is self, we then say cancel sending event loop to self and set running to false. Our loop here is the magic of it all. What it's going to do is it's going to set iterator to be iterator plus iterate by. So whatever the iterate by is currently at, that's how much we're going to increase it by. We then check what is the iterator at. If the iterator is greater than 25 but less than 150, we're going to be setting the R, G, and B values to create a color that matches the color of a toasted mallow. So you'll see we use the color with color of mallow on mallow stick. The next thing you're going to note here is that these numbers are kind of inverse of what you actually want. What you're going to notice happening here is we start with the color white. Remember, white is 1, 1, 1. And the color we want to get to is 0.88, 0.63, and 0.22. And so we subtract that amount from white. But to get there so it happens slowly over time, what we're going to do is use our iterator. And so we take iterator minus 25 because it stays white for 25 iterations. And so we subtract 25, we then divide by 115, which is the length of time until it turns brown. So we want it to take 150 iterations to turn golden brown. So we take iterator, we subtract 25 to get it relative to the 25 to 150 that we're working on. We then divide by 115 because that's how many cycles we want this to take. And then we multiply it by that number that we're subtracting from white. So this will make it really fine adjustments until it gets to exactly where we want it to be. Now that we've colored the marshmallow, what we need to do is scale the mallow. And so we take the mallow scale that we set earlier. We're then going to multiply it by 1. So we take 1, so it's always at least its original size. And then we add to it the iterator minus 25 because we wait 25 iterations before we start scaling. And then we divide by 125. Now 125 defines how long are we going for. So you'll remember up here we iterate from 25 to 150. So this is going to happen over the length of 125. We do that with a over 1 second delay, so that way the scaling happens in motion, and we're applying this to the mallow on the stick. And then if the iterator is greater than 150, we're going to color it black. So color is 0, 0, 0. We then scale with mallow scale, and it's very similar to the math you just saw, except we take iterator and we're subtracting 75 rather than 25. And we're doing this because this makes it shrink, because when it turns burnt, I imagine it just shriveling up a little bit. We do that as well over 1 second and on mallow on a stick. And then if iterator is greater than 200, like you really just leave the marshmallow in there for a long time, we hide the mallow on a stick, making it look like it's just burnt away. And then the very last thing we do at the end of this loop is we run an if statement to define whether or not we're going to continue sending this loop to self. So the first thing we check is if the Boolean running is true. And we also check to see that iterator is less than 210, because after you've burnt it off, we don't want to continue running this loop. There's no reason for this to run every second. It just adds overhead to your world. There you have it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye!